Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. Now, whenever I cover RPG horror stories, I'll often comb through the comment section of the post and try and see different perspectives that I can account for in my own commentary. But I'll quickly remember that it's Reddit, and reading the comments often has the same brain cell killing effect as sniffing a washcloth soaked in gasoline. But there's one common thread that I see in all of these comment sections. You see, there's always some intellectual asking the tried and true question, why didn't you just leave? Not gonna lie, this question is everywhere, and it's got the same vibe as asking a homeless person why they don't just buy a house. Like, yeah, obviously, if you're the subject of an RPG horror story, you're gonna have some regrets and you're gonna see some red flags you didn't see before. But if everyone just threw up their hands and said, "F it," the second an awkward nerd made them feel uncomfortable, then D&D would have never made it past the early 2000s. People are gonna have reasons for trying to convince themselves to tolerate stupid people's stupid decisions, and different people are gonna have different levels of tolerance for abuse. I don't know, man. Reddit is chock full of hedonist weirdos. Maybe they're into it. We don't kink shame here. Okay, maybe we kink shame a little bit. The story I have for you today stars a player whose excitement for D&D is shattered to pieces when the DM and their fellow players gang up on them to violate their boundaries again, and again, and again, leading to our intrepid protagonists to ask themselves the question, why am I even here? Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Enjoy. This week's story comes from Reddit user Little Alienated and is titled, "Dumbass Player Refuses to Leave a Game That's Bad for Their Mental Health." It's me, I'm the player. The title explains most of it, and this story is 6 pages long in the Google Docs, but I had to get it off my chest. For a long time, I was convinced that this story wasn't that bad, but every time I mentioned bits of it to other people, they were disturbed and mad on my behalf. So I decided to finally write and share this. Important notes for extra context. I'm autistic with... Editor, can you put in a pronunciation for this? I'm way too stupid to say that word.
Alexithymia.
Thanks, babe. Which makes it hard for me to recognize and name my emotions. It can take me several weeks to figure out what I'm feeling and why. Which is also why it took me so long to realize that what happened to me is not normal and could be considered an RPG horror story. Also, I was the only woman in the group. The story focuses mostly on me playing a Sorlock, the DM, the Cleric, and the Hexadin. I met the DM in a different campaign on the same server. The campaign fell apart for various reasons, and I got invited to join the other game somewhere around level 7, since they needed an extra player. At first I joined in with a Warforged melee-focused ballerina, since I wanted to try playing something that I haven't played before. I wish I didn't ignore all the red flags that showed up for those first couple of sessions. I made her mute, and she would communicate by making little speech bubbles with the minor illusion cantrip. And this is when one of the players decided that their character cannot read, at level 7, halfway through the story. I tried to work around that until the DM simply cured my character's disability 3 sessions in. I didn't like that very much, since it was a big part of her backstory and personality. We talked it out, and I retired the character and rushed to make a new one. This is where the real story begins. This time I wanted to go full caster, so I made an Air Genasi Storm Sorcerer, and because I didn't have much time to iron out the details, his first design was pretty bad for my own standards at least. His introduction to the party was hella awkward and rushed, but we had to act fast because they were teleporting away and the DM wanted to get this out of the way. Several months of sessions later, I wanted to change how my character looked, since by that point I had time to develop him through roleplay, and his old design didn't reflect his personality at all. I talked to the DM and we brainstormed ideas of how to do the look swap, and it was all good. This is where I started to notice the problems. I did mention in our previous casual conversations that it makes me uncomfortable if my characters are made naked for whatever reason, and I requested to not put them in those kinds of situations. Yeah, the reveal of my new character look was completely nude. It was with the use of a reincarnation spell, so I can see logically why the DM would do that, but this is Dungeons & Dragons fantasy world, so I don't understand why it had to be mentioned at all. But maybe he forgot, or I didn't mention it in session 0 for this particular campaign. We had to talk about it afterwards, and I thought that it wouldn't happen again. It did. Some other issues also showed up in the same session. Because of that reincarnation spell, my character's old body was dead and still there. We decided to carry his old severed head, cause speak with dead shenanigans. There was another soul trapped in my old body. It wasn't in my backstory, it's something that the DM came up with on his own and didn't tell me. But it made me uncomfortable the way that cleric just carried it around on his belt. I just felt like there were more respectful ways of carrying my character's dead remains. This is where I made my biggest mistake. Since it was an in-game problem, I tried to fix it with in-game solutions, which is just talking to them in character. I don't like PvP. Maybe if I talked to them outside of the game, saying that I didn't like that, something would change, but then again, considering the rest of the story, none of them actually cared about my feelings anyway. The reincarnation moment was supposed to be a turning point for my character, a literal metamorphosis. It was going to give him more confidence in his abilities and in himself. It was also an event that would break his warlock pact, so he was free from his abuser's control. But if it turned out that way, I wouldn't be writing this story. I tried so hard to roleplay him standing his ground with PCs and NPCs alike, but I wasn't allowed to. Every attempt was smashed to the ground. The cleric even made a joke that they needed to keep my character's self-esteem low so that they can control him better. But that wasn't a joke, was it? Because they kept doing this over and over again. A lot of the time, it felt like I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. No matter what my character did, they always found a way to put him down. Why didn't I just leave at that point? 2 reasons. 1, the games were almost always on schedule. The same time, the same day of the week. We rarely canceled. 2, mechanically, the game was amazing. Combat was very engaging and at the difficulty level that I enjoy. A lot of homebrew improvements were implemented, so many quality maps and a harvesting/crafting system that utilized monster parts, which could be turned into potions and magic items. I guess you could say I got bribed by a promise of treasure, but the chest turned out to be a slimy mimic. My partner kept encouraging me to leave, since they could see how badly all this affected my mental health. But I couldn't do it. Maybe I naively believed things would get better, or maybe some part of me just wanted to see how it all would end. Either way, I stayed. Fast forward a couple of sessions, and we finally got to my backstory quest, dealing with my character's former patron. My sorcerer asked for help, and the party agreed. But once again, things went bad fast, because instead of her, it was an aboleth with layer actions. We rolled badly, and used almost all of our resources on this one fight, and the cleric was dead. It was one of the hardest fights that we had had by this point. Then my patron shows up and summons the town guard, who were in her pocket all along. We had no chances at fighting her, so the 2 remaining PCs decided to make a deal with her. This was the biggest betrayal for my character, considering they all knew what she did to him. At this point, he broke. The party gave up on him, so he gave up on himself. This was the moment when he really needed that support, but all he got was a stab through the heart. This was supposed to be my character-defining moment, and he knew that he couldn't do this alone, only to be proven that he truly was alone in all of this. So he did the only thing he could. He made another deal with the patron to save the party and the cleric. They didn't even try to stop it or help, and watched as he was condemned to a life of being enslaved to her. But honestly, in a weird f***ed up way, between her and the party, she was actually the lesser of the 2 evils. At least the abuse she inflicted on my character had a point. Meanwhile, the party was just bullying him just for fun. It didn't help that for months I had to hear the cleric's comments about how sexy my patron was, and all the things that he wanted to do to her. This was also the session when I gave up as a player. This moment really hurt me. I knew the party didn't have my back at all, even though I tried my hardest to connect with them in and outside of game. On their personal quests, I was quiet, respectful, and just sat in the background, because I knew it was their big character moment, and I knew that it was important. But they couldn't do the same for me. This would be a perfectly justifiable moment for me to finally leave, but still, I was stupid enough to stay. Nobody else saw this as a big deal, so it had to be a problem with me, right? After that fiasco, my character was angry most of the time. He was lashing out at everyone like a cornered animal, but apparently the party thought it was funny and took it as a sign that he was totally okay and that his story was done. The Hexagon even had the audacity to call it getting closure. Where? A sexy warlock patron, huh? Calm down there, Casanova. It's a figment of your imagination. But something tells me that you're no stranger to lusting over fictional women, because there's no way in hell that you got real ones hanging around, bud. Look, don't get me wrong, asking the question of, why didn't you just leave, is valid. But the reality of reading these stories is that we are observing events as told by one person who experienced them. Plus, the subreddit is called r/RPGHorrorstories, not r/why I let myself repeatedly get slapped in the nuts by a maladjusted nerd. People already complain about post length on this sub, so I don't think it's necessary for OPs to justify why they continue to put up with the abuse, unless it's really not that believable. Then in that case, I got no problem with laughing at them for lying on the internet. Obviously, people are gonna have their reasons for why they stayed, whether they said it or not. Like, for example, in this story, when OP said that one of the reasons that they stayed was consistent scheduling, I felt that so hard. I would kill a man to have a D&D group that says, hey, every Sunday at 5 p.m. we're rolling dice. Be there. Sweet God in heaven, if that DM's not single, then I'm coming in like a home wrecking ball, because I'm shopping for a wedding ring at that point. But I digress. I like this story because it really emphasizes the fact that there's often a lot of good that's going on in the background of an RPG horror story. It's like the boiling frog analogy. A lot of the time, that warm water is pretty comfy until it burns you out of nowhere. And by the time you get burned, you're already pretty damn invested in that water. Now, I would be lying if I said I didn't find it a little strange how attached OP is to their character, but I do understand that bleed is a thing. For those who don't know, bleed is when parts of the character have been infected by parts of the player. Ideally, there's supposed to be a pretty solid barrier between character and player, but 99% of the time there is a significant amount of crossover between the two, because most people playing D&D didn't waste their money on an acting degree. I play a lot of goofy and over-the-top characters because I'm a slut for attention. That's my version of bleed, and it's gonna be different from person to person. But what is not normal is the fact that the DM and party have a thing for picking on OP like Vosh has a thing for horses, and if you were smart, you'd be staying the f*** away from both. I'm gonna chalk this up to OP's autism for not being able to recognize this, but it's somewhat obvious to me that they are trying their damnedest to make our OP feel unwanted, which isn't something that anyone deserves in a place where they're supposed to be having fun. The line about, no one else saw this as a big deal, so the problem must be with me, hits different knowing what we know now. In situations like these, the only thing that really matters is how you feel. If you're feeling unwanted, abused, or just generally uncomfortable, it's okay to talk about it. Best case scenario, it gets all put out there and you guys can actually talk about what can be done to fix it. But if they don't react well to it, well, now you have every excuse to pack up and dip and save yourself the trouble of playing the boiling frog game. Since I couldn't connect with the party, I tried connecting with the NPCs instead, which was proven to be impossible because they rarely let my character speak to anyone. Why? Because he was socially awkward, or as the party leader said, I would just screw it up anyway. So, how was he supposed to get better at talking to people then? There was only one NPC that my sorcerer did treasure though. The only person that showed him kindness without wanting anything back, so I thought it would make sense for him to develop a small crush on the guy. This, of course, was another thing that the party made fun of until the very end. I know some people have trouble separating romantic feelings from sexual ones, but this crush was truly innocent, especially since my character was asexual, and I stated so several times. And yet, the party were the ones making sexual jokes about it, even though I repeatedly said that it wasn't like that. The point is that this NPC became the rope that my character desperately clung on to, the only person that kept him sane. The other NPCs he managed to get close to all ended up dead, tortured, or both. Like his two mentors. One lost their powers, and the other lost his head, which we also carried around in a bag of holding. For some reason, severed heads are a big theme in this. One more will show up later. Can you guess whose? At one point, the DM decided to bring my character's parents into this, who I didn't put in the backstory either. I thought it was to give my sorcerer an exit door with the former patron situation, but no, this is not how this DM operates. Hope was not allowed to exist for my character, so we killed him off before we even met. Apparently, for them not to die, we were supposed to go to a specific location in the Underdark, which wasn't even remotely close to any quest locations that we had on our agenda. And more importantly, after what happened with his patron confrontation, my character would never trust the party to go anywhere near his other family. As a player, I wanted to avoid it all too, because I knew they would absolutely ruin it for me with way too many sex jokes and general disregard to any of mine or my character's feelings. Important thing to note here is that those things only happened to my character, including the suddenly your character is nude thing. The worst thing that happened to the others was that they were tortured a little bit in dream sequences. That's it. I was the only one singled out like that. This was the point when I wrote down all the things that bothered and hurt me. They were just bullet points, but I needed to see them all on one piece of paper to realize that it was not just my anxiety acting up and making things seem worse than they are. So I copied it and brought it up with the DM. He apologized, but didn't really do anything about it. All I heard was promises that this is all for character development. It's to make him stronger, that it'll get better. Just wait and see. It will all become clear at the end. Well, I believed him and stayed, but nothing got better at all. In fact, the opposite happened. The character I played at the end of the story didn't even feel like my character at all. It felt more like if you took his skin off, stuffed it with straw, and pretended it was a person. I can't even stand the art I made of him during that time. But what of the bullying? The explanation I received was simply, oh, this is how men treat and talk to each other, which is bullshit. Just another iteration of boys will be boys, except we are all adults here who should have known better. I never had this happen to that extent in any other games I played in, and those had men in it too. The DM asked me what I wanted him to do about it, exactly. I showed it to him first because I wanted to know if I was the problem, and he agreed that I wasn't. And what the other two players did to me was unfair. All I really wanted was to know that there was at least one person who would have my back in this situation. I didn't want to be overwhelmed and feel like all of them were ganging up on me if I decided to bring up my problems with the whole group. His only solution for all this was an offer for my character to make a deal with the BBEG and betray the party. I said no to this plan because it wasn't a solution at all. Sometimes I wish I went with it and maybe got some sort of revenge, even if it was pointless and stupid. Then maybe for a moment they would all feel as shitty as they made me feel all the time. But ultimately, it's not something that would have actually made me feel any better. This all leads us to the last session, the big finale, and my character died in a stupid way before we could even reach the BBEG. Thankfully, we were allowed to revive him, and oh yes, he wakes up naked again. Except this time I was allowed to use minor illusion to cover up. Thankfully, I got my hands on some real clothes, but no armor. The fight drags on forever for about 5 sessions? I can't remember exactly, but it was definitely more than 3. At one point in the battle, my character confesses his feelings to the NPC that he has a crush on, or at least tries to. They get separated and the battle continues. Last stage of the fight, the NPC is back with help, but he gets paralyzed till the end of the fight. I thought this was just so he could stay out of it, but oh, my faith in these people always comes back to bite me. The BBEG rips his head off just because. That sends my character into a feral-like state, and somehow I land the finishing blow. Yay, it's finally f***ing over. My character can rest now. But no, he cannot. It's impossible to bring the NPC back even though we have all the spells and components to do so. His soul just doesn't want to be back, even though he promised to travel with my character after all this is over, and he never got a reply to the confession either. So now my sorcerer lost the last person that kept him sane, and for what? All of this just felt so pointlessly cruel. It was literally the last session, and everyone else got their happy ending except for me. My character's life got turned into a weird psychological torture porn for no reason at all, other than the DM's amusement, I guess. First of all, this is just bad storytelling. I played with a lot of other groups, and I did finish 2 campaigns before. What I've learned from DMs that give a shit is that sometimes you need to forego realism in order to tell a good story, to make a satisfying ending for your players. Yes, sometimes characters die, but a good DM would give the players time and roleplay opportunities for them to make their peace with that. To give closure. Actual closure. This was just suffering with no purpose or goal in mind. Characters and people can't grow on suffering alone. Trauma doesn't make you stronger, healing from it does. People who support and love you help you become stronger, not the bad events themselves. How is this supposed to help my character be better? When all this was over, I asked the players why they treated my character the way they did. The answer? It's because my character used self-deprecating humor, so they thought it was okay. I admit it did make me lose my cool for a bit, because that answer was f***ing disgusting to me. Are you saying that he was asking for it? What? When I finally left, I still took the blame, saying that I didn't enjoy playing with them because of my bad mental health, without mentioning that they were a big reason why I was feeling that way. Part of the reason why I took the blame was the DM explicitly telling me that it would be easier for me to change than to have the whole group reflect on their actions and, I don't know, not treat my character like a piece of shit. I guess it was more important for him to impress all the other men in the group by ignoring the problems and letting me take the fall. Boys will be boys, right? It took me writing it all down and sharing it with my friends to realize how horrible the experience was. The group said it was one of the best campaigns they've ever been with. Well, for me, it was the worst. I felt singled out and like my voice didn't matter. Heck, my character had no real impact on the story at all. Everyone he ever cared for is dead. Oh, and it was revealed that almost every single person that we had helped would die in a cataclysm in 5 years anyway, so what's the point? Later on, I got a good piece of advice that went, just because there are a lot of green flags doesn't mean you should ignore all the red ones. And that sums up my experience pretty well. I stayed because I did see some good in them and I wanted to believe things would be made right. Eventually. And at the end, I was the one getting hurt. That campaign ended with my character using a wish scroll to wish that he never existed. I know I could have just left before things got that bad, but I saw what the DM does to the characters of people who leave, and I couldn't let him hurt my character like that. I know this reasoning is really stupid to most people, but I couldn't bring myself to surrender the little control that I had left. I got attached to this little guy as I played for little over a year. So the wish scroll was a way for me to heal and let go, to release my character from this long string of suffering. He was destroyed and reborn again, reincarnated with a fresh coat of paint. Literally. A new name, a new backstory, and a different class. I did keep some of the old him, but only the bits that I could improve on. I will end this story on a positive note. I found another group and I'm playing this character there. A campaign where he is actually liked and respected. Honestly, the contrast is jarring. He finally has opportunities to shine, and I'm discovering parts of him that I wasn't allowed to before. I didn't know that he could be a leader, and it's really fun to watch him grow in that role. Thank you for reading for all those who had the patience to do so. TLDR. My boundaries get disrespected because I have too much faith in people, and my character is put through pointless suffering and humiliation because of it. End of story. Yeah, that's what months of saying, this is fine, will do to ya. I will say that it's super important to be self-aware and acknowledge that some problems exist entirely within our own heads. But it is also equally important to recognize when your suffering comes from factors that you can control, and that's something that OP got around to recognizing, albeit a little late. I will say that there were some odd takeaways from this story on OP's end, mostly the boys will be boys thing. I don't know, that just kind of felt like it was shoved in there randomly for no reason other than the fact that all these assholes ended up being dudes. Like it or not, but there is some truth to the "this is how men talk to each other" thing, at least from my experience. Me and the guys I consider my brothers will say some of the most abhorrent shit to each other and then just move on as if we didn't just violate 14 articles of the Geneva Convention. That being said, it is super important to realize that not everyone is going to to be comfortable in an environment like that. And me and my boys have made it very clear that, hey man, if I go too far, I need you to tell me because you know better than I do that my default state is being a dick. But that little caveat at the end there was not present in this story, so I think it's less of a boys will be boys thing and more of a assholes are gonna be assholes kind of thing. These guys get off on being bullies and saw your lack of backbone as an opportunity to prey on you for their own weird enjoyment. I'm glad that you got out, OP, and hopefully you're able to have taken a quality lesson from this too. Speaking of quality, we have a fan art submission this week. That's right, how about we take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake. This week's fan art comes from viewer Mouser, who depicts his original characters Mabe and Vendetta the Mirror reaching out for the Drake's wisdom on the acquisition of forbidden artifacts. Which, if you've been watching for a while now, you should know I'm pretty good at acquiring stuff that didn't necessarily start its life belonging to me.
What are you doing with my phone?
Calling an expert on dead memes and cringe. We're gonna need all the help we can get if we're gonna take back our power.
The gods track every phone call we make. This better not be another Pizza Man incident.
Trust me, it won't. Sorry, IRS. Press 2 to leave a message. You've got one message. Hey, I heard some stuff around the bush, and do you have any information on Chainsaw Man, Swass, and Raid Shadow Legends? Call me back when you can before I find out what Divine Smite does to the trout population. Bye. I have a landline? Thank you again, Mouser, for submitting your art. Be sure to check out their social media linked in my description. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and send in your fan art. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.